In the Tofu the Vegan Zombie animated short Zombie Dearest, we had a sequence where we had Lab Monkey number 5 riding on the back of the big wheel that Tofu was driving, and he fires off this Nerf gun. Let me go ahead and kind of go through the frames, and the missile has a slinky attached to it that's firing out of this, that's being launched out of this Pringles can. Okay. Now, Martin Stankard, one of the artists on the project, came up with a really great rig using cloth dynamics and Metalink. And what I thought we could do is recreate this kind of setup, but instead of using dynamics, we'll use several other tools just to take a look. It'll allow us to explore some of the tools in Lightwave, but also we'll see that there are several ways to go about doing the same task. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and jump right into the project, and we'll start in Modeler. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down, and over here in Modeler, we need to create something that's going to act as our slinky, as some kind of spring or coil. So I thought we could go ahead and make just a quick spring. So I'm going to hop over here to the Create tab, Box, and I'm just going to create, actually I'm going to stop that and hold down Control and create a perfect square. Okay, Control is going to constrain it to a perfect square. Not that that's that important, but we'll go ahead and do it. Okay, now with just this created, I'm going to go ahead and jump forward by creating a UV map. This is going to come in handy in a minute. So I'm going to switch over to the UV texture, A to fit window. I'll zoom out here. Just I want to have my UV window nice and big. Okay, and I'm actually going to move out that box a little bit away from my origin. I'm going to use that as my center point for my lathe. And let's go ahead and make our UV texture. So T for texture, new. And we're going to call this spring, and we'll map it down the Z. Planar map is fine. Create, and what that does is it takes this polygon and it maps it over the entire UV grid. So here's 0, here's 1, here's 0, and here's 1. Okay, so it takes up the entire UV space. Now, with this made, I'm going to go ahead and hop over to Multiply, Lathe, in. Well, I'll hit in for numeric in a second. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag in for numeric. And if you notice, before I even do anything, any changes, I've already got the newly created geometry, well, soon to be newly created geometry on my UV grid, because I've got Make UVs selected by default in the numeric panel. So if you've ever seen this option and wondered why it was grayed out, well, if you don't already have a UV map, well, this isn't going to be an option for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and make this a spring. Right now it's just a loop. So I'm going to go ahead and change, let's give it a lot of sides since we're going to have this thing spring around. Let's just go ahead and do 180. Now that's a bunch of geometry right on top of each other. So my end angle, instead of 360, let's try, I'm going to do 2400. So it goes around and around and around and around, instead of just 360 degrees where it would have, the spacing between each segment would be very small. Now the spacing has more gaps, except I need to make an offset. Let's just try 5 meters. I need it to be more. I'm going to use a mini slider. Okay, and just kind of gain some space between there. Okay, so with my, let's take a look. With my offset and my increased sides and my increased end angle, I've got a nice little spring. But what's really cool is I've got the UV for it already set up. So I'm going to go ahead and commit to that. Let's go to texture wire, and I can see that my spring is inside out. I just hit F for flip, and let's hit the tab key so we can have a nice little spring here. Now, I want to be able to tighten this up. Now I could go change the offset, but I need to go ahead and create a weight map so that we can take advantage of it over in layout, but we can also take advantage of it here in Modeler as well. So I'm going to switch over to weight shade, which is what we were in a minute ago. Okay, and right now I have no weight map. I could come down here and make a new weight map, but I'm going to make a weight map really fast based off of our UV map here. So if I select the polys on the UV map, as I select around, it's winding down our little spiral here. So I'm going to use that to my advantage to create a weight map. So I'm going to come over to Map, UV to Weight, and what it's going to do is it's going to take the 0 to 1, and we're going to go 0 to 100% of a weight map. So where the points on the UV grid are, say, at 0.5, well, that'll be 50%. So let's make a new weight map, and we'll call this spring. And we'll keep all the other settings from 0. We'll do 0 to 1. And OK. So there we go. We've got 100% down here, 0% down here, and a nice gradient between all of those. We're done with that UV map. We could maybe use it later for something else, but for this project, we're done. We just needed it to create this weight map. OK, so how can we use this to our advantage for modeling? Well, if I come over to Modify, Move, in for numeric, the fall-off type I can set to weight map. Okay, and now when I go to move it, it's going to move the higher values more than the lower values. So if I wanted to make a spring animation, just a simple spring, I could have this as my base, and I could create a morph target stretched out like this, and I've got it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this nice and snug. Something like that. Okay? So I've got barely any space, just a sliver of space between those coils. And I'm going to go, before I forget, in for numeric. Now that I've done that, I'm going to change it to none for fall off. Otherwise, the next time I go to move something, it's just going to act really strange if I don't have a weight map. It won't do anything, and I'll think the move tool is busted. So I'm going to move this down so that the top of my spring is equal with the origin, because that's where I'm going to leave my pivot point. I could change it by going over to View, Pivot, and change where the pivot is, but I'll go ahead and leave it where it's at. And let's go ahead and use this object. We're going to need to come back, but let's do this in baby steps. So I've got my spring, and now I just need to save it. So I'm just going to save this off. Spring weights 001, which it looks like I already have something like that. So 00. Let's do spring weights demo 001. Save. And I'm going to take this and send it over to layout. So send object to layout, and we've got our spring here. Now what I'm going to do is attempt to animate it with the settings that we have. So I'm going to take this, and on frame 20, let's just move this up. Say something like this. Okay, so that's going to be our basic little animation. I'm going to hit P for properties. I'll come over to the Deform tab, and under Add Displacement, let's choose Lazy Points. Okay? What Lazy Points does is makes a delay from where the pivot point is on down the chain. So if I scrub through this, we can see that it's grabbing the top points and moving up. The problem here, I think we can all see it, is that it's distorting my my object, where I might be able to get a pretty cool look out of that, but not for what I'm after for this. Now I could go back, change my model, and put more spacing between the coil, and then I'd be able to have it look a little closer, but it still would be off from what I'm after. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that. We'll leave lazy points there. We just deactivated it, and we'll come over to inertia. Now inertia is kind of like lazy points, except now I have options. One option that I see is weight map. That's interesting, so I'll do spring. And for the lag rate, unlike lazy points, there are no options. Well, here I can change my lag rate. Well, I'm just going to try 1 and see what happens. So there we go. Oh, it's so close. But to tell you the truth, it's kind of cool. We might be able to use that somewhere down the road. But again, it's distorting my object, even though I've got weight map. So why is it distorting if I'm using a weight map? If this is 0 and this is 100? Well, it's because it's also using the distance from the pivot point. So the top half of the coil is moving before the bottom half of the coil. So we'll want to keep this in the back of our head for future projects. This might be an effect we could use for something, but for this, it's just not going to work. Okay, so let's go ahead and just turn that off for now. Now, one thing that I can do is try and figure out if there was a way to make it so that the top points and the bottom points of the coil moved at the same time. That would work. Well, one thing that I came up with is, what if it was just one row of points? And that brings us to some other issues that we've got to find a solution for. But let's go ahead and start with that, because that seemed to make sense to me at the time. I'm going to go over. I'm going to go back to Modeler, and I'm going to get rid of some of this geometry. So I'm going to select the top and the bottom and hit Delete. Then I'm going to select the top, like these 3 polygons, so I can select loop. Let me cut and delete and paste. So now I've just got a flat shape, lots of space in between, and I'm going to save that and send it over to, or actually I'm going to synchronize the layout so that it updates. Okay, so now it's just a flat coil. Let's do inertia and scrub through. Okay, well, it's still kind of pulling, not what I want. Okay, it's not really the effect I want. So let's go back and see what else we can do. So if I come over here, I want a row of points, but I'm going to use a lot of points, more points than I have. So one thing that I can do is I can subdivide this. Now by subdividing it, I'm still maintaining the weight values on the points, which is important because we still want to use those weight values. It'll give us the most control that we can have using something like inertia. Okay, and I don't need it to be subpatch. I need a bunch of 2-point polys is really what I'm after. So I'm going to hit Control D, which freezes it. So now I've got lots of geometry, but I just want 2-point polys. So I'm going to zoom in, grab these polygons, select loop, and then I'm going to expand my selection all the way, leaving 1 row of polygons free. Now I don't want to delete these polygons. I want to actually delete the points. So I'll come over here to select points, and it selects the points that make up those polygons. When I hit delete, it leaves me with a row of 2-point polys. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these extra ones I don't need, and come over here and delete those. Those were curving in. I just want a nice little spring. Okay, which leaves me with some 1-point polys. So W for statistics. Go over to polygons, and I'll get rid of those 2 1-point polys. So I have 1,000, just over 1,000 2-point polys, but that'll work. So I've got this spring now. By doing it this way, there's a bunch of different ways to go about making a 2-point poly chain, but just whichever way you decide to go about making it, make sure that when you select one of these points and hit I for point info, and we come over to the weight, that it has a weight value. There's some ways that you can go about making a 2-point poly, and it will not it won't have the weight map still attached to the points, which we really need those weight maps if we're going to have full control over in layout. Okay, so let's call this what we want to work with, and I'm going to save this. So S for save, and let's synchronize to layout, and I'm going to hop over to layout, and now I've got a 2-point poly chain here, and with inertia attached, it's lifting up. See how it's coiling? Now I'm going to need more frames, it looks like, or I'm going to change. Actually, let's just do more frames. It'll be more interesting that way. So well, I'm going to go halfway. I'm going to make up my mind here in a second. 0.5, and so now it's going a little faster for the lag time, but I need some more frames to finish this off. So I'll just do 180 frames. Okay, and now come about 110, we finish off. Okay, so it coils up as we're going. Actually, just so we can make sure we see this textured shaded wireframe. Okay, so there's our coil. That's what we're after right there. Okay, so here's the problem. I've got the motion that I want, but I have a 2-point poly chain. Where's my piping? Where's my, the thickness to my slinky or my spring? Well, that's the whole thing that we were after to begin with. Well, I can get that no problem. Okay, and I'm going to do it in a way that might kind of seem strange, but it works, and it looks really cool. Plus, we get to kind of take a look in some other areas of Lightwave. But this is kind of a boring animation right here, so before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and make this a little more interesting. Let's go ahead and close down our object properties, and I'm going to delete that keyframe, and let's set up something a little more interesting. I'm going to come over to Items, Add Null, and I'm going to call this Spinner, and let's just make it a ball shape just for fun. Okay, it'll be a little more interesting to look at. I'm going to move that ball shape, say, over to here, just offsetting it from the origin, but also from the pivot point of that spring. Okay, and now I'm going to take that spring, M for motion options, parent to the spinner. I'm going to take the spinner and say on frame, we'll just say frame 80, we might change our mind on this. Y for rotate, and you can already see it happening. See, I don't have to do any calculations with this, which is pretty nice. So I'm going to go just negative 180. Okay, and scrub through, and the spring goes over. Okay, so that's, to me, that's a little more interesting. It's not just moving straight up. But in the case of the tofu shot, we needed it to just kind of fire out. But then there was a time where it does some wrapping around. So it's just the delay that we're after. But here we've got this nice little, almost like a slinky motion. Okay, kind of hopping from hand to hand here. Okay, but as I promised, we're going to make it a tube. So instead of trying to use some kind of meta link and linking this 2-point poly chain and a high poly chain, a high poly object, you still run into a problem of the points being so close together when it's coiled up tight that MetaLink might not have the information it needs to separate those points. So what we can do, and this is, to me, this is fun. So I'm going to go over to Control F6 to open up the Volumetrics tab, and under Add Volumetric, let's add Hypervoxels. Okay, this is, I told you it was going to be kind of strange, but this works great. So I'm also going to go ahead and go over to the Render tab and open up Viper, okay, because we need to take a look at what we're doing here. Okay, I'm going to take the spring, that 2-point poly chain, and double click to activate it. Okay, because I want this to have object type surface. Let's render. Whoa, look at this. We got our spring. Now I know it's voxels, but it holds up as an actual object when you set it up as surface. It looks just like if we were to create this in Modeler. I'm going to change the particle size. I'm just going to use the mini slider. That's a little too much. I'm going to get it just so that it feels like there's a little bit of breathing room between the coils. And this is one nice thing about Viper, is that I can do this, kind of see my changes in real time. Just a few tweaks here and there. I promise I won't tweak this too much, but let's just call this our spring. Okay, now I want to dress this up a little bit. Instead of just making it gray, actually I'm going to make this 0. I know I promised, but I can't help myself. Okay, so I know that we're going to jump right into the spring, but I don't want it to be gray. I want to dress it up some. So I'm going to come over to Windows, Backdrop Options, and let's choose the gradient. That'll be more interesting. Okay, and then why don't we go ahead and make this reflective? Let's make it metal. Okay, so instead of coming over to the Shading tab and working by default with these settings, I'm going to hop over to Windows, Presets, and use some hypervoxel presets. Let's go to the generic, and I'll just double click on this option right here for load settings. Yes, yes. That's pretty cool. Looks like a good start of metal. It's kind of our generic metal, but we can go and tweak from there. Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to let's move the camera. So camera, C, T for move, and I'm just going to move out some. Okay, let me close this Viper window just for a second so I can make sure that we're framed decent. Okay, that looks decent to me. Okay, so now all we have to do is go back to the Viper window and let's do another render. Okay, and I'm going to make a preview, and though as you can see it renders pretty fast even set to normal, I am going to pause the video just for a second so I can make the preview and we don't eat up valuable time. So I'll be right back. And we've got our preview, so I'll go ahead and push play, and we can see we've got our little coil there. Now, it's not an object. I mean, somewhere buried beneath these voxels is a 2-point poly chain, but we'll never see it because it's surrounded by voxels. So if you didn't know, it looks just like the object. It looks like an object that we would make. So this is one solution for doing a slinky or a spring type animation, and that you want a lot of control over, and you can use inertia. You could use lazy points. You'd get a slightly different look. You wouldn't get the same kind of control. Now again, this is one way of doing it. You have lots of different options. You can use bones with a morph. If I were going to do bones with a morph, I would still use the beginning of this video where we set up the actual weight map on the spring so that we could make the spring move up and down and not lose its volume, not lose its shape. And we could also use, like we did for the tofu movie, we could use cloth dynamics and metal link. So we could use cloth dynamics on a 2-point poly chain and then metal link it to a much higher res object. But I thought this would be a fun thing to show so that we could kind of investigate all different kinds of options in Lightwave. So sometimes thinking outside of the box will lead to some pretty interesting results. Another option of giving your 2-point poly chain some volume would be to play with the particle line thickness. Let's go ahead and go back to our Hypervoxels tab, and we're going to deactivate this. We'll keep it there just in case if we want to go back. So I'm going to go ahead and close that down, and we can deactivate this if we want, but because we turned it off in the other one, we're set. I'm going to do a quick render, and we can see that it's just a 2-point poly. Okay, so we're not going to use Hypervoxels on this one. Okay, so I'm going to leave this right here so that we can come back to it. And in order for this to work, I need to go to Camera, Properties, and change from Classic Camera to Prospective Camera, or any of the cameras like the Advanced Camera or the Real Lens Camera, but we'll use the Prospective Camera. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and put 5 passes of anti-aliasing. It'll just look a little sharper. It's not going to really hurt our render time because we're just dealing with a few 2-point polys. And now I'm going to go over to the Object, Properties, and under Edges for particle line thickness. Now, if I were to go with a higher number, like say 10, let's do a render, we can get this solid line here. But if I were to go with a negative number, it actually looks like 3-dimensional geometry. So we're going to use, let's use -10, but we want to dress it up like we did the Hypervoxels. So we might come back and adjust this number, but I'm going to go over to the surface editor, Windows, let's do presets, and we'll find something good. Let's do rippled chrome, but you know what, I'm going to take that ripple off. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and click T, and we'll get something very similar to what we had in Hypervoxels. That's one nice thing about the preset window, is it could be a starting point, and then you can adjust the settings as you need to. Okay, so let's do a render. And there we go. So very similar to the look of the Hypervoxel, and we'll just do a couple renders. So this is our starting right here, and this is midway through, and this is towards the end. So another option for getting some volume to that 2-point polyline, and just remember it's Object, Properties, Edges, and we've got the particle line thickness. A negative value is what you're going for if you want this kind of look.